This morning we're going to continue on with the thought of Joseph, and we have been spending quite a bit of time in the life there with Joseph, and how that God had a plan. God had a plan there in Joseph's life for Joseph, for his chosen people, the seed of Abraham. And you know, when we see how God was there with Abraham, and how that God blessed Abraham, and how that God used Abraham, Isaac, and then Jacob, and how that he used Joseph, and how he is using Joseph. And then when we think of the way that Joseph is treated, and yet God had a plan, and God used that plan. And last week we were there in chapter 43 of Genesis, where Joseph's brothers came down to Egypt the second time, because there was food in Egypt, and there was a drought in Canaan. And God had a plan to bring Jacob and the family down there to Egypt, to preserve them and to multiply them. And he blessed them. But what he used Joseph, and what Joseph went through from the very time that his brothers sold him, until we come to our sermon this morning. And I'm going to read there a verse there in chapter 43 and verse 15. And the men took that present, and they took double money in their hand, and Benjamin, and rose up and went down to Egypt and stood before Joseph. And when Joseph saw Benjamin with them, he said to the ruler of the house, Bring these men home, and stay and make ready, for these men shall dine with me at noon. So here Joseph gives an order there to the ruler of the house, who was taking care of Joseph's business. And now here we see that Joseph sees Benjamin for the first time for over 20 years. Roughly 20 years, maybe a little more, maybe not quite that much, but in that area. Think of how it is if you'd be one of your siblings. You wouldn't see them for a period of 20 years. And yet, you're very near to them. Of course, we find that Joseph here tells them that they're supposed to eat at his house. He tells the ruler to get ready. And of course, this brings us down there to the end of, not the end, but down there to verse 25. And they made ready and presented, and they made ready the present against Joseph, and came at noon, for they heard that they should eat there. Now they couldn't understand why they were supposed to eat with Joseph. The last time they were down there with Joseph, why they didn't know it was Joseph, their brother, of course, and they don't know it yet. But Joseph gave them some kind of an impression that he was a very rough, rude man, and he treated them in a way that they really didn't appreciate. Because when they got back to Jacob, they said that this is a rough man. And he also said that if they don't bring Benjamin along down the next time, they won't get to see his face. And this was kind of a holdback. This was a drawback for them, because they needed food. And Jacob said, go get food. And they said, we're not going unless Benjamin goes with us. And of course, as time goes on, Benjamin goes along. Not that Jacob really wanted him to go. But here was a family that needed something to eat. They needed corn, they needed bread. And yet we find that Benjamin goes along. And this brings us down there to verse 26. And when Joseph came home, they brought him the present. Now they took some presents along down there. Of course, they took down what they had. But that was not too much, really, which was in their hand into the house, and bowed themselves to the earth there before Joseph. Exactly what Joseph said they would do in the dream. You would go back, I think it was to chapter 37, and there you find that's where Joseph presented the dream there to his brothers and also to Jacob. And Jacob said, "Do you really mean that we're going to bow down to you?" And here Joseph's brothers come and they bow themselves to the ground. And he asked them their welfare, and said, "Is your father well?" And the old man of whom ye spake, is he yet alive? And they answered, "Thy servant, our father, is in good health. He is yet alive." And they bowed themselves, and they bowed their heads, and made obscene. They bowed again, because of Jacob. Now, at this point, they still didn't know who Joseph was at this time. They thought they got rid of him for good. They thought they'd never have to deal with him again. They thought they'd never see his face again because of the hatred that they had within their heart. Think of it. Brothers having such hatred that they went through what they went through, and what they did to Joseph to try and get rid of him because of the jealousy that was, and the hatred that they had within their heart. And then the story that they told, and were living in guilt all this time. It says, and he lifted up his eyes. Joseph lifted up his eyes and saw his brother Benjamin, his mother's son. The others were half-brothers, but Benjamin was his full brother. And he lifted up his eyes and saw him, his mother's son, and said, "Is this your youngest brother, of whom you spake unto me?" And he said, "God be gracious unto thee, my son." And that's about all he could take. Then the tears began to flow. It says, and Joseph made haste, for his bowels did yearn upon him, his brother. And he sought where to weep. And he entered into the chamber and wept there. Now, what do you think they thought when he asked that question? Is this Benjamin? Now, he noticed Benjamin back there in verse 15, when he first saw his brothers coming. He saw Benjamin. And he knew Benjamin was in the crowd. But now they're gathered in the home there with Joseph. There in the home there with Joseph for this meal that the fellow was ordered to get ready. He had from morning till noon to slay and to get ready to prepare a meal for these men to eat with Joseph. And now he sees, he looks in the eyes of Benjamin, and it's more than he could take. He wept. He wept for joy, not sorrow, but he wept for joy because he finally saw the brother that he was taken away from. The one that really meant a lot to him. And the one that really meant a lot to his father Jacob. But Jacob all this time was under the impression that a wild animal took care of Joseph. Now, they're there for a meal. And Joseph now gathers he gets out of sight, but now he comes back. And Joseph washed his face and went out and refrained himself and set on bread. Now they're at the meal. And it says, and they sat on for him by himself, for them by themselves. Now the Egyptians didn't eat with the Hebrews. Ain't that something? Here's a Hebrew that interpreted the dream for Pharaoh and went to all the bother to tell Pharaoh what the dream is all about. And if it wouldn't be for that Hebrew, they probably wouldn't have anything to eat either. Because it was God working through that Hebrew that brought plenty down there to Egypt. Because Joseph was the one that was in charge of storing up. And if you remember, as we came through the life of Joseph, that there was so much food in Egypt that they didn't know where to go with it. And they didn't even know how much they had. But there was food everywhere. But now here, Joseph gathers with his brothers, and the Egyptians and the Hebrews didn't eat together. And it says, the Egyptians which did eat with him by themselves, because the Egyptians might not eat bread with the Hebrews, for that is an abomination unto the Egyptians. And they sat before him. Now, they didn't have this. I say the ruler, of the person that is in charge here of the meal that Joseph commanded to do. He sits Joseph's brothers from the first, the second, and the third, and the fourth, and the fifth, and the sixth, and the seventh, and the eighth, and the ninth. He sits them in order of their age. Don't you think that might have stirred up some curiosity in the minds of Joseph's brothers? What is all of this about? And then they sit Benjamin. And it says, and he took and set the mess unto them from before him, but Benjamin's portion, now look at this, Benjamin's portion was 5 times more than theirs. Now, how would you feel, what would you think if you go to a restaurant and you'd order your meal And they'd bring the first serving out, and then they'd bring the second serving out, and then they'd bring the third serving out, and they'd keep going down through there. And when the last one comes out, it's 5 times bigger than the others. Don't you think that would have stirred up some curiosity? Well, it did, I think. I'm sure it did. They were still trying to figure out how is this all happening. First of all, when they got down there and they realized they were going to eat with Joseph, this rough man, that they were troubled. But the server, he says, be at peace. Be at peace. Because he says there in verse 23, and he said, peace be unto you. Fear not, your God, and the God of your father hath given you treasure in your sacks. That's when they were upset, or not upset, but they were wondering, how did this happen that we got bags of food and our money was put in it? So they couldn't understand that. But now we find, now they eat with Joseph. And they still don't know who Joseph is. They're still carrying that load of guilt. And they're still wondering, how is this all happening? And how is all this taking place? And we don't understand sometimes how God works. Well, we don't understand how God works. Sometimes we don't even understand how God works in our own hearts and in our own lives. But God has a way of doing things. And then that brings us down to chapter 44. And it says, Joseph's final test of his brethren. You know, Joseph here, should I say, rubs him over a little bit. He makes them think a little bit of some of the things that they did. And it says, and he commanded the steward of his house, saying, fill the men's sacks with food, as much as they can carry, and put every man's money in his sack's mouth. Now here he's doing the same thing. They brought the money back from the other time that they couldn't understand why they got food, and then they got their money. They thought someone made a mistake or someone was trying to get revenge on them. But now he does the same thing again. But he says, fill them as full as you can. Now when I think of filling a bag, a burlap bag, like we did when we were on the farm, and they don't do so much of it anymore. But I always wanted to make sure there was enough of room that I could bring the bag together and then take my hand and then take the string and go around there, that there would be enough of room that when they lift up the bag don't come apart, because that's embarrassing. Because I used to always say that my dad taught me how to tie a burlap bag that doesn't come open. And he did a pretty good job of it. But if the bag's too full, you can't tie it. It's going to come open. But he said, make it as full as you can. And then put the money back in again. Now, I'm wondering, did they put the money that they brought back and the money that they brought for this time in the bag? I'm thinking they did. I'm thinking they sent everything back again. The Bible don't say that. But that's just how God deals with people, because he gives double portions. It says, but then he wasn't done yet. And he said, and put my cup, the silver cup, in the sack's mouth of the youngest. Who was the youngest? Benjamin. In the youngest, and his corn money, and he did according to the word that Joseph had spoken. And as soon as the morning was light, the men were sent away, they and their donkeys, their asses. Now, as soon as the morning came, they spend the night there. They had a good meal. They spend the afternoon together. They spend the night together. They got the food that they wanted, and they're on their way back. They send them away. And it says, and when they were gone out of the city, and not yet far, they didn't get very far out of the city, Joseph said unto the steward, up, follow after the men. And when thou dost overtake them, say unto them, wherefore have ye rewarded evil for good? Now here, they thought they're in good terms now. The ruler didn't speak rough to him this time. He even ate with them. And Benjamin, why, he was stuffed. He had so much to eat probably that he could hardly get around. But that doesn't say that in the Bible either. But they're on the way back. And now they notice something. They notice that someone's coming after them. And of course, and as they didn't get far out of town, it's not this in which... And when they were out of the city and not yet far, Joseph said, now overtake them. And then when he overtakes them, he says, wherefore have ye rewarded evil for good? It's not this it which my Lord drinketh, whereby indeed he dineth, and ye have done evil in so doing. And he overtook them, and he spake unto them these words. And when they said unto him, wherefore saith my Lord these words? God forbid that thy servants should do according to this thing. Behold, the money which we found in our sack's mouth, we brought again unto thee out of the land of Canaan. How then shall we steal out of my Lord's house silver or gold? His brothers, Joseph's brothers are saying, now we're honest. If we would be crooks, we would have never brought back that money. But we're honest. We're not thieves. We're not trying to get silver or gold. We even brought the money back from the other time. And now you're accusing us of being a crook. It doesn't say that in the Bible, but that's what it amounts to. And then they say, with whosoever of thy servants it be found, both let him die, and we also will be my Lord's bondmen. Now they make a pretty bold statement here. They don't know who it is, but they say, now, if you find this cup, with ever whom you find it, let him die. And we, the rest of us, we will be bondmen. We'll be slaves. You'll be slaves. And he said, now also, let it be according unto your words. The servant says here, let it be according to your words. He with whom it be found shall be my servant, and ye shall go blameless. Now he knew who it was. But he says, if it's whoever has this cup, he'll be the servant. And the rest of you, you can get on your way and you can be blameless. And they speedily took down every man his sack to the ground, and opened every man his sack. And he searched and began at the eldest and left at the youngest. And what do you think? The cup was found in Benjamin's sack. Exactly what they didn't want it to happen. Because Jacob said, if my younger son goes down there, if Benjamin goes down there and something comes up, and evil comes upon him, that he don't return. He says, that'll be the end of the enemy, too much for me. And they rent their clothes and laid every man his ass and returned to the city. Now they go back to the city. They left with joy, returned with sorrow. And not Judah. Judah here, he made a pretty bold statement back there to Jacob, if I can lay my eyes on it there real quick. Anyhow, he said to Jacob, that if anything would happen to Benjamin, first I think it was another one, but Reuben. Yeah, Reuben says something, that if something happens to Benjamin, you can kill my two sons. But then Judah speaks up then sometime after that. And Judah said unto Israel, his father, send the lad with me, and we will arise and go, that we may live, and not die, both we and thou, and also our little ones. And I will be surety of him, for my hand, shall thou require him. If I bring him not unto thee, and set him before thee, then let me bear the blame forever. For except we had lingered, surely now we had returned the second time. So now Judah here takes the responsibility. So they go back. They're headed back to Benjamin. They're headed back to plead for Benjamin. Benjamin was supposed to be a bondman. And Judah and his brethren came to Joseph's house, for he was yet there, and they fell before him on the ground. They fell again. They bowed. They didn't just bow, they fell. They were desperate this time. Here was Benjamin, their younger brother, and their old father. I shouldn't say old father. Their dad was an old man, and his health could have failed any time because of his age. But yet, and Joseph said unto them, what deed is this that ye have done? Wouldn't ye not that such a man as I can certainly dine? And Judah said, what shall we say unto my Lord? Or what shall we speak? Or how shall we clear ourselves? God has found out the iniquity of thy servants. Behold, we are my Lord's servants, both we and he, also with whom the cup is found. And he said, God forbid that I should do so. But the man in whose hand the cup is found, he shall be my servant. And as for you, go you up in peace to your father. He says the same thing. He says, he's going to be my servant. But as for you, get out of here. I'm thinking, was Joseph getting fed up with him? Or was he just rubbing it in? And Judah came near and said, O Lord my God, let thy servant, I pray thee, speak a word in my Lord's ears, and let not thine anger burn against thy servant, for thou art even as Pharaoh. My Lord asked his servant, saying, have ye a father or a brother? And we said unto my Lord, we have a father, an old man, and a child of his old age, a little one. I don't think he was so little by that time, but they said a little one. His brother is dead. They're speaking to Joseph, and they're saying, you're dead. And he alone is left of his mother, and his father loveth him. And thou sayest unto thy servant, bring him down unto me, that I may set mine eyes upon him. And we said unto my Lord, the lad cannot leave his father, for he shall leave, if he leave his father would die. A very close attachment here. And thou sayest unto thy servant, except your younger brother come down with you, ye shall see my face no more. And now we brought him down here. And it came to pass, when we came up upon thy servant, thy father, we told him the words of my Lord. And our father said, go again and buy us a little food. They didn't want a lot. They just wanted a little bit. Maybe it would soon rain. You know, they didn't know. They didn't know how long this drought was going to be. And if you read on here, you'll find that there are only 2 years in the famine. And our father said, go again and buy a little food. And we said, we cannot go down if our younger brother be not with us. Then will we go down, for we may not see the man's face, except our younger brother be with us. You know, Joseph really had these men shook up. They were certain that if Benjamin doesn't come down there, they're not going to see his face. And I got to come to a close, my goodness. And one went out from me and said, surely as he is torn in pieces, and we saw him no more. And if you take this also from me, and mischief befall him, ye shall bring down my gray hairs with sorrow to the grave. You know, they're pleading. They're pleading here for Benjamin, and yet they're between a rock and a hard place. If they don't return with Benjamin, they'll probably lose their father. And yet they knew that if you don't bring Benjamin down there, they're not going to see his face. Now they were on their way back. They thought all's going well. Now they got themselves into this mess. You know, sometimes you might think, how did I ever get myself into this situation? But God always has a way out, doesn't he? And he had a way here. He still had a plan. And he was about ready to open it up, open wide. And it shall come to pass, now therefore, when I come to the way of thy servant, my father, and the lad is not with us, that his life is bound up in the lad's life. And it shall come to pass, whom he seeth that the lad is not with us, that he will die. And the servants shall bring down the gray hairs, and thy servant our father will surely go to the grave. For thy servant became surety. Judah saying here, thy servant. I'm standing here. I'm your servant. And I became surety for the lad unto my father, saying, if I bring him not unto thee, then I shall bear the blame to my father forever. Now therefore I pray thee, let thy servant abide instead of the lad, a bondman, and my Lord, let the lad go up with his brethren. For how shall I go up to my father, and the lad be not with me? Lest peradventure I see the evil that shall come on my father. That brings us up to chapter 45. And there in chapter 45, we find next Sunday where Joseph makes himself known to his brothers. But Judah, how he pleaded and how he dealt with Joseph to let him go, to let his younger brother go because of what could happen. You know, and at this time yet, they're still carrying the guilt of the story, the lie they told to Jacob. All these years, they didn't confess that. They still had Jacob under the impression that Joseph is dead. And you know, they even believed it themselves. You know, don't ever think you can tell a lie and get away with it. It's going to come back on you somehow. You know, there's a saying sometimes they used to say, and maybe I said it already, that if some people lie that much in their lifetime that they even believe their own lies. When I worked at Tyson, I had a good foreman, but he claimed to be a Christian, and I never heard that he passed away either, but I still believe he believes that he's a Christian. But he could come up with some stories. If things didn't hold out in a day's schedule, he could come up with a story that he even believed was true. Because sometimes he'd say, you know, if he couldn't get it, if you promised a truck at a certain place at a certain time and it didn't get there, and he'd just say, well, truck broke down. And when you'd get there the next day, they'd say, well, did you get your truck fixed? Then what was I supposed to say? Sometimes I said the truck wasn't even broken. Why should I lie? Because he did. But, you know, well, don't lie and expect to get away with it. And Joseph's brothers are still carrying that guilt. They still didn't confess it. And they believed, they had Jacob believing that Joseph was dead, and I believe they believed it themselves. And there they were pleading with Joseph. All right, I said enough.